Hello and welcome to By the Book. I'm your host, Joe Hebert. Today we continue our course on truth, justice, and leadership with the study of St. Thomas Aquinas. In previous episodes, we discussed the relationship between faith and reason, nature and grace, and the end of human life and the nature of human happiness. So with these topics, some of the basic themes that we've seen is that for Aquinas, faith and reason are harmonious. Nature and grace are cooperative in nature. So there's a paradox in human nature, which is that human beings are by nature desire happiness, which comes from the knowledge of God. And this is something which by nature we cannot attain without God's help. But it's not a flaw of human nature, because from the beginning, this is how human nature is designed. So our nature doesn't exist in a void. It exists within an ordered whole of the cosmos. And within that ordered whole, the help of God is available. So just as human beings being political and social by nature, we cannot exist and we cannot thrive without the assistance and the cooperation of others. And that's not a flaw, it's a feature of how we're made. Likewise, that extends into the supernatural realm, that we are designed for friendship with God. And so the last thing we noted is that as we get into the ethics and the political thought of Aquinas, this will be very significant, that we are made for cooperation, we're made for friendship. That's an essential part of who we are. So in this episode, we're going to start our exploration of Aquinas' ethics proper. That is his discussion of what is good or bad and why in human behavior. And we will begin with a discussion of the nature of good and evil in themselves and see when Aquinas uses those terms, what does he mean by them? Remember, this was something that Machiavelli denied even exists. You know, the good is an imaginary concept. So as we delve into these Socratic thinkers, and Aquinas most of all because of the detail and depth that he goes to explain these things, we want to see exactly what is meant by these things in classical thought. So we're going to look briefly at an article in which Aquinas asks the question whether evil is a nature. And the answer is going to be no. And this is something that goes back at least to St. Augustine, who had argued very forcefully that in the nature of things, good is a positive reality and evil is not a positive reality in itself. That is, everything that exists by nature is good, and when things conform to their own nature in themselves and in their relationship to other things, when they follow the order of things, what Tocqueville called the admirable order of things, then they are good. Everything is good insofar as it exists and it has a proper place and a proper function within the whole. It's only when things are disordered, that is, they're taken out of context, so their internal order is disrupted and or their relationship to other things in the cosmos is disrupted. That's what evil is. But you notice that's not a substantial thing. That's just a relationship gone wrong. So evil is really just the disarranging or disordering of the things which are essentially good, but which do exist and have to exist within a proper order. When that order is disrupted, it doesn't make the things themselves evil, but it makes their condition evil, you could say. So the main point that Aquinas is making in this article is seen in the last sentence of his answer, that it must be that by the name of evil signified the absence of good. But as he explains this in his answer, he happens to give us an encapsulation of what is meant by good, and that's the primary thing that we want to focus on at this point in the course. His kind of brief formula for what is meant by the good. In his answer to this question, he says that one opposite is known through the other, as darkness is known through light. And you notice that darkness is really just the absence of light, so he's setting that up in this answer for evil being the absence of a good that belongs somewhere. Hence also what evil is must be known from the nature of good. Now we have said above that good is everything appetible, and this is where we start getting into the nature of what is good. Appetible means desirable. And so going all the way back to Machiavelli, we saw that, for Machiavelli, he rejects the desirable. He rejects the concept of the good as something that is objectively desirable, something that we ought to desire, that we should desire, that it's good for us to desire. And he reduces human life down to the satisfaction of desire without questioning whether that desire is actually good. But what Aquinas is doing here is much like Socrates in the Gorgias, who says that it's good to fulfill desires that make us better. In other words, it's good to fulfill good desires, not bad desires. He says the good is everything that is appetible, that is desirable, that is by its nature, by objective reality, by the order of things, it is something that we can and should desire. And thus, since every nature desires its own being and its own perfection, it must be said also that the being and the perfection of any nature is good. So, as we said earlier, everything is good if it's in the proper place and order. So essentially, that is, in its being, everything is good. It's good that everything exists. In the creation account, God creates things and he looks at them and he sees that they're good. So each thing that exists, per se, is it's good that it exists, but it's also striving not just for mere existence. Each thing has a place within the order of things, and that's its perfection or completion, is when it sort of takes that place. It achieves that purpose for which it exists. And so Aquinas encapsulates the good with these two things: to exist and to achieve the purpose for which one exists. That is what is by nature good. And so evil has no room there in terms of being any kind of essential nature. Nothing is essentially evil. Evil doesn't really have an essence. Evil is simply the negation of that formula. It's to destroy something, to make it cease to exist, or to take it outside of its proper order, to disarrange it or disorder it. And so this is the foundation that we will use to then delve into a more detailed discussion of what exactly is meant by the good, particularly for human beings. So as we're acting each and every day, we're making choices. On what basis do we choose to do something or not to do something? So the article that I want to look at here, and this is an extremely important article, one of the most important, certainly from an ethical and political point of view in the entire Summa. And the title may not make it quite so obvious why this is so important: whether the natural law contains several precepts or only one. So it seems like a very technical question. It's about natural law, so we'll have to talk briefly about what Aquinas means by natural law. And it's a question about what are the number of the precepts, one or several. So that's all very technical, but as he answers this question is where Aquinas goes into the greatest depth and detail in any one particular place to outline what is meant by the good. Now, why is that? Well, if we think about what natural law means, natural law, a law, Aquinas says, is a rule and a measure of human actions. That is, it tells us what we ought to do. It also judges or evaluates our actions. There are many different kinds of law, but by the natural law, what Aquinas means is a law that exists to which we have access, but it exists without our having to make it or manufacture it. It's not a positive or man-made law. It's a law that is built into us by nature. And so it's an innate knowledge that we have of what is good and bad, what is right and wrong, by which we can be ruled. So as we're thinking about what to do, we can consult natural law, we can consult our natural knowledge of what is good and bad. And as we evaluate our actions, what was good or bad about what I did or other people's actions, we can also consult natural law as a source for that. And so what exactly is natural law telling us? we'll see in a moment that the one precept, the universal precept of natural law that could be argued is the one rule, is do good, avoid evil. So this is something that Aquinas derives from Plato, Aristotle, and that whole tradition, as well as Scripture, that ultimately this is the commandment. What we're commanded by nature, as well as by revelation, is to do good and to avoid evil. So that, of course, invites the question, well, what do we mean by the good? And do we know by nature? Does the natural law tell us what is good? Because if the natural law didn't tell us that, then either somebody else would have to tell us, or that rule wouldn't be very useful. Do good, but what is good? So the answer is going to be that natural law does tell us what is good, at least in outline, at least in the essential principles of what is good. It doesn't always tell us specifically the exact right thing that we need to do, but it gives us the criteria that we would use to evaluate whether something is good or bad. And so the natural law has to go beyond the one precept of do good, and it has to stretch into an actual instruction, if you will, in what is good and evil, something that we know innately by nature that helps us to discern what is good and evil. So to unpack a little bit what Aquinas means by natural law, we could start with his on the contrary. He says, the precepts of the natural law in man stand in relation to practical matters as the first principles to matters of demonstration. But there are several first and demonstrable principles. Therefore, there are also several precepts of the natural law. Now, as we get into his answer, we will see some examples of what he means by these precepts. But what he's referring to here, as he often does, is Aristotelian philosophy. Aristotle had said that when we're reasoning theoretically, and theoretical reasoning is about trying to understand what is or is not. Does something exist or not? What is it? How does it exist? What is the nature of things? That basically is the fundamental question of theoretical reason. And Aristotle said when we're reasoning theoretically, we're not just randomly putting concepts together in our head. If there were no rules to reasoning, then reasoning wouldn't really be a structured enterprise, and it wouldn't produce any structured results. So reasoning is not just a random series of thoughts. There is something holding it all together. And you could say, well, there's logic holding it together, but it's important to see that logic, being an internal thing, doesn't necessarily tell us anything about the external world. But theoretical reason is about trying to understand the external world. So there has to be something beyond just an internal rule. There has to be a rule that connects us to the external world. And these are the first principles of theoretical reason. They don't tell us the answers to everything. They don't tell us the nature of all things, but they give us certain basic rules that we can follow to evaluate the data that we're looking at. And again, we'll look at examples in just a minute to see what that is. But what Aquinas is doing, and this is the basic structure of this article, is to say that even though Aristotle did not mention principles of practical reason, there must be principles of practical reason. Some people think Aquinas is, illegitimately trying to, conscript Aristotle for some theory that Aristotle wouldn't really endorse. But if you look carefully at his argument here, I don't see where Aristotle could object to this, because again, if there are no principles or rules to reason, then there is no reason. There is no reasoning. So if we can reason theoretically, Aristotle says, there must be rules by which we are reasoning theoretically. Otherwise, we wouldn't be reasoning theoretically. We would just be randomly asserting things or denying things with no rational basis. The same holds for practical reason. When we're thinking about what to do, we're either just flipping a mental coin, randomly selecting something, or we are applying reason. And if we're applying reason, there must be principles that define what we mean by reason in a practical context. They define what it means to be reasonable about actions. And so that's exactly what Aquinas is going to be looking at. And as we'll see, he's going to start with the principle do good, avoid evil. Where does he get that? Aristotle. Aristotle says every action we take is aiming at the good. So while Aristotle didn't call that natural law, and he didn't specifically say this is the first principle of theoretical reason, the same or practical reason, the argument is, I think, completely Aristotelian. There must be principles of reason if there is reason at all. There certainly is practical reasoning. And what is the basic rule of it? Do good, avoid evil, is the rule that Aristotle himself identifies. So now we get into the details. The precepts of the natural law are to the practical reason what the first principles of demonstration are to the speculative reason. We just covered what he means by that, because both are self-evident principles. So he brings in, and again, this is an Aristotelian concept of self-evident. What does self-evident mean? Aquinas will explain a little bit, but if we just back up even further, evidence is something that tends to prove or disprove a hypothesis. So let's say somebody is accused of murder. Not every piece of evidence will be determinative. This proves definitely they're guilty or definitely they're not guilty. But anything that tends to make it more or less likely, this is what would count in a courtroom under the rules of evidence. If it makes it more or less likely that this person did commit murder, then that would be evidence. So evidence is anything that is going to sway our judgment one way or the other. But most evidence, of course, is external, right? We don't look at somebody and say, well, it's self-evident that this person committed murder. Just look at him, right? There's nothing in that person in himself that's going to prove it. You need some DNA, you need some fingerprints, you need some external things. But some things are self-evident, Aristotle argues, and particularly the first principles of theoretical reason, he argues, are self-evident. And we're going to look at concrete examples in just a moment. It means they prove themselves. It means not that you can't possibly deny them, but if you deny them, you're ignoring the evidence that is built into these things. And to prove that you're wrong, all somebody has to do is show that the proof is built in to the thing. They don't need anything external than the principle itself to prove that principle. And so it's really crucial that self-evident principles exist, because Aristotle says most of the sciences were using a process to try to prove or disprove things, but you can't do that all the way down. If you had to prove everything, and every time you question something, you had to find some external evidence, that would be a never-ending process. There has to be some kind of platform on which you're building things that are self-evident. You can then use these principles to evaluate the evidence that is not self-evident. Okay, so Aquinas goes on here. A thing is said to be self-evident in two ways. First, in itself. Second, in relation to us. Any proposition is said to be self-evident in itself if its predicate is contained in the notion of the subject. So, to say, for example, that man is a rational animal, that's what a man is. So all you're doing is really just breaking down what's already there in the word man. You're not adding, you didn't have to discover this externally by looking at anything else outside of man, to see these things. But he says, to one who knows not the definition of the subject, it happens that such a proposition is not self-evident. So he's just distinguishing between the objective and the subjective here. That something may be self-evident, but somebody being ignorant of the lingo doesn't realize that it's self-evident because they don't understand what it's actually saying. So what you need to do is not find external evidence. You need to explain the meaning of the terms, in which case then your proof has become clear. For instance, this proposition, man is a rational being, is in its very nature self-evident, since who says man says rational being. And yet to one who knows not what a man is, this proposition is not self-evident. Now he refers to Boethius, who had said certain axioms or propositions are universally self-evident to all, and such are those propositions whose terms are known to all. As every whole is greater than its part, and things equal to one and the same are equal to one another. These are a couple of examples of the principles of theoretical reason. Every whole is greater than the part. So if you're trying to understand the nature of something that has parts, you have to be able to distinguish between the whole and the part, and to see that the whole is composed of parts. The parts are not sufficient to make the whole. And things equal to one and the same are equal to one another. So when you show that something, is equal to something else, and something else is equal to that, then you know automatically that the things connect up, right? So these are examples. The whole is greater than the part. If somebody says, I think the part's greater than the whole, they're talking nonsense. You don't have to prove that they're wrong. You simply have to show that that's a nonsensical statement. And this is one of the ways you can show something is self-evident, is that to say the opposite is nonsensical. Okay, so now we're going to get into the nitty-gritty here of what we can know by nature about the good. But he's going to start with a little more detail about theoretical reason. What is the essential foundation of theoretical reason? There's a number of different self-evident principles in theoretical reason, but there's an order within them. They're not all equally essential or equally important. Now, a certain order is to be found in those things that are apprehended universally. For that which before aught else falls under apprehension is being, the notion of which is included in all things whatsoever a man apprehends. We literally can't be talking about anything unless we are somehow perceiving that it exists. Whether we are right or wrong about that, that's exactly the whole basis of thinking about something or considering something, theorizing about something is, does it exist? How does it exist? We are essentially talking about existence, that or being. That's what we are trying to figure out with theoretical reason. Wherefore, the first indemonstrable principle is that the same thing cannot be affirmed and denied at the same time, which is based on the notion of being and not being. And on this principle, all others are based, as is stated by Aristotle in the Metaphysics. So the principle of contradiction, something cannot be and not be at the same time in the same manner. So I could be hungry before breakfast and not hungry after breakfast. That's okay because we're talking about a change in circumstances over time. But I can't say, that I am human, I am not human at the same time in the same way. It doesn't make any sense. So this is all revolving around the principle of being, but being taken as a question of being per se. That is, we simply want to know if something exists, how does it exist? That is theoretical reason. Now, as we'll see in just a moment, practical reason is an extension of this. So practical reason and theoretical reason are not fundamentally different. They're just looking at something from a slightly different angle. We see that in the next sentence. Now, as being is the first thing that falls under the apprehension simply, so being or not being is simply the first thing that we consider about anything. So good is the first thing that falls under the apprehension of the practical reason, which is directed to action, since every agent acts for an end under the aspect of good. So there seems to be, a separation going on here. When we think about what is, then we're looking at being or not being. When we think about what to do, we're thinking about good or not good. As we've already mentioned, the fundamental rule of practical reason is do good. So every time we're acting, we are thinking about what is good. We may not be thinking out loud in our mind. We may, not be articulating that to ourselves, but that is basically what we're searching for every time we make a choice. What is the best thing? What is the good thing to do? Or even if we're looking at the least bad thing, we're still thinking about the good and preserving as much of the good as we can with any particular action. But we've already seen in the previous article that we looked at that the definition of good is what preserves and perfects our being. Okay, so the root of the concept of good is being. So that shows that this transition it's not a radical transition. It's just a different perspective on the same thing. Theoretical reason wants to know what is. Practical reason wants to know what is good. But what is good is whatever preserves or follows or upholds or perfects the order that theoretical reason can apprehend. So theoretical and practical reason are always working together. Consequently, the first principle of practical reason is one founded on the notion of good, namely that good is that which all things seek after. Hence, this is the first precept of law, that good is to be done and pursued, and that evil is to be avoided. All other precepts of the natural law are based upon this, so that whatever the practical reason naturally apprehends as man's good or evil belongs to the precepts of the natural law as something to be done or avoided. So we'll see in a minute some further nuances of the natural law. Just like with the theoretical reason, you have a number of different principles you could identify. The whole is greater than the parts, for example. But the core of it is that something cannot be and not be at the same time. So it's that principle of being which is fundamental to theoretical reason. And likewise with practical reason, the core of it is the good. That we're trying to do what is good, avoid what is bad. But there could be many other principles that help us to look at different aspects of the good or different ways that we could identify what is good. But they're all in service to this one basic thing. And again, you could trace it all back to theoretical reason, because what is good in its proper order. And so theoretical reason can tell us what exists and what that order is. And then practical reason is how do we act in accordance with that? How do we realize that in our actions? So if that sounds at all abstract, Aquinas is not going to leave it there. He's going to follow the thread to the point where we can actually see not with high specificity, because the natural law is not in itself going to give us a detailed list of things that we should do or not do. How should I comb my hair? Well, the natural law is not going to tell me the answer to that. It's giving us a set of principles, and principles, as we've discussed before, are beginning points. And the beginning point for action is the end. So it's basically giving us a set of goals. These are the basic goals that we should be aiming at with our actions. As to exactly how we achieve those goals, the natural law does not pretend to tell us that. That is filled in with, as we'll look at, in the course, that's filled in either by our own personal reasoning or consultation with others, or in some cases by the human law, the law of the community that we live in, saying, okay, we're going to do this, we're not going to do that, getting very specific about certain things. But here we're just looking into how by nature do we discern that something fits the definition of good or evil. First of all, we see the rule of practical reason is do good, avoid evil. What is our nature telling us about the nature of the good? It's what preserves and perfects us, we saw. Here, Aquinas is going to go into a little more detail about that formula. Since, however, good has the nature of an end, and evil the nature of a contrary, Hence it is that all those things to which man has a natural inclination are naturally apprehended by reason as being good. Here's where it's really crucial to see that by nature we are designed well. We are designed to be good. And so even though our nature has been corrupted, and we know that we do in fact desire things that are bad, and we act on those desires, but still the essence of our nature is directing us towards what is right and good. So a major part of discerning what is good and bad is to distinguish between the things that we desire by nature, that we have a natural inclination, versus the things that we desire against nature. We may desire them by force of habit. We may desire them by, just by being overwhelmed by our passions. But if we stop and reflect on it, something in our nature is going to tell us this is not what I really desire. That is a really important thing in terms of the process that we would have to use to apply this concept of natural law. Is we can't, on the one hand, we can't just follow all of our desires because they're not all in accordance with nature. On the other hand, we can't just suppress all of our desires and try to live without desire, because by nature we have certain inclinations or desires and they're good. So we need to be able to discern between what is natural or unnatural in our desires. And this is what Aquinas is going to be doing in this article. It's giving us an outline of what we can know is a natural desire or not. But he also says naturally apprehended by reason. So this is not, he's not trying to suggest that in practical life we're always going to stop and have a philosophical debate within ourselves and really philosophize about what is good and reason through in this metaphysical way about what we're doing. That's obviously not accurate, and it's not necessary in Aquinas' view. But on the other hand, the theory does make clear that as human beings, we fulfill our nature by acting reasonably and reasoning about what we're doing. So we may not have to reason in a highly abstract way all the time about everything, but we do have to be thoughtful and think through what we're doing. Anytime that we're acting without reasoning, and here I'm not talking about, I could ride a bike without having to think about how I balance this thing because it becomes instinctive. But when we're making choices, so even if I'm riding my bike, okay, which way am I going and why am I going there? To the extent that we're making choices without thinking, we're really betraying our human nature. So we have inclinations by nature, but by nature, inclinations are meant to be governed or regulated by reasoning because they're inclinations of a rational being. And so they should be understood as messages for our rational mind, which our rational mind can then process and say, okay, I have an inclination towards something. What is the good, if any, that is available here, and how should I go about achieving that? So reason combined with inclination, it's teamwork, basically. The inclination and the reason are combining to give us guidance in favor of things or against things, to pursue something or to avoid something. Wherefore, according to the order of natural inclinations, is the order of the precepts of the natural law. So here's where he's going to delve into, okay, what do we actually glimpse? And notice it's an order. It's not something that is just a random list. Oh, here's some good things, here's some bad things. There's a structure to it. There's a priority. Some are greater, some are lesser, some are more or less important. Because in man, there is first of all an inclination to good in accordance with the nature which he has in common with all substances. So the first thing in the order, and it comes first, does it mean that it's the most important? As we're going to see, in a certain sense, it's the opposite. It's the most basic. It's the most basic thing about us, but it's also it's the least unique or least special thing about us. We share this with all beings, that that they, in as much as every substance seeks the preservation of its own being according to its nature, and by reason of this inclination, whatever is a means to preserving human life and of warding off its obstacles belongs to the natural law. So this is fundamental, literally very important. All beings as such tend to preserve themselves, whether we're talking about the laws of physics, and or we're talking about the laws of biology, particularly the laws of biology. Any biological, entity, even if it's the simplest form of life, there is, if you think about it, a miraculous, set of properties. This thing adjusts to the environment, and it does so many incredible things to preserve itself. And Aquinas says, according to its nature. So, you could break down, the components of anything, the parts of any whole, and those parts could be arranged in many different ways. So if you break down the cells or the the different components within a cell of a living thing, all of those molecules could be taken and used to make all kinds of other stuff. But the point is that this living being is trying to preserve them in the order that preserves its life. So it's trying to stay alive, and therefore trying to preserve that order that defines life itself. All the parts being in the right place and working together in the right way that produces the living activity of that creature. So this is something that is clearly not an arbitrary inclination. We see it in all beings. Aquinas is even applying this to inanimate beings. If you want to break something or destroy something, it usually takes external force. It's not going to cooperate. It has to be imposed from the outside. Just like if you want to kill a living thing, it's going to resist. So there is this built-in inclination, and this is the first thing that we can see by reason, that this is reasonable. This is the way things are designed. It's the way things are meant to be. That things preserve themselves as much as possible, and that's a good thing. So already the implication is when we're acting, anything that we do that preserves human life is good. Anything we do that destroys human life is bad. We can already see that there's millions of details that this is not telling us. What should I have for dinner? It's not telling me that. But it's certainly, if I said I want to eat something poisonous for dinner that's going to kill me, natural law would say no. Or if I'm just going to stop eating completely, natural law would also say, no, you need to preserve your life. So it's setting boundaries. Within those boundaries, there are millions or billions of possibilities that would be legitimate, that would fit the rule of, do good, avoid evil. We're a little more specific now, preserve human life. But it's still a very broad rule. There's a lot of different things that we can do and should do to preserve human life. A lot of things that we need to avoid that could be destructive of human life. And there's no way that any simple rule is going to summarize all those things. And so that the purpose of natural law is to give us, again, the principle, which is the goal. Preserve human life is a fundamental good. So as we'll see, there's going to be two more. And again, this is an order, so we'll have to think about not only what each one of these is, but also how do they relate to each other in a structured manner. Second, there is in man an inclination to things that pertain to him more specially. Now, more specially is an important phrase here, because we're seeing part of what the order is we're getting more specific as we go in. Human beings are not just objects, and we're not just living things. More specifically, we're animals. And so what does he have to say about that? According to the nature which he has in common with other animals. So that we want to preserve ourselves, well, so does an amoeba, so does a tomato plant, etc., right? But there's something more specific about us that we share with animals. And in virtue of this inclination, our animal inclination, those things are said to belong to the natural law, which nature has taught to all animals, such as sexual intercourse, education of offspring, and so forth. So you notice how we have transitioned here from the preservation of human life. And he never says just preserve your own life. I think that's very significant to see, because we want to preserve ourselves within our own nature. And our nature is not to be selfishly concerned only with our own life. It may be the case, for example, with some living things, that they are only concerned about preserving their own existence and have no consideration for others. But even here, when we get to the animal stage, we see that at least for a wide spectrum of animals, there is a very strong instinct to preserve not only their own existence, but that of the species. Not that they're thinking about the species in an abstract sense, but that they have an inbuilt inclination to procreate and to take care of their young. So if you think about birds, for example, building a nest, laying the eggs, sitting on the eggs, then, the chicks hatch and they're feeding them. All the things the birds are doing, including if a predator comes along, the bird is going to go and try to lure that predator off somewhere. It's risking its own life to try to preserve its young and give them a better chance of survival. So this is something that is not only further beyond just self-preservation, but is also a higher thing. It points to a higher good, which is the perpetuation of the species, in our case, the human species. And it points beyond just the individual to a community. Even in animals who are not political or social as we are, it gives them a certain degree of sociality beyond the life of say, an amoeba or something. And so it's not in direct conflict or essential conflict with the first. The animal wants to preserve its own life and to procreate and educate its young. But in certain cases, it could be, right? Again, with the predator coming, the bird may risk itself to protect its young. And there's already having two principles of natural law, we can see there could be practical circumstances where they conflict. And so it's important for us to see that as we go first, second, third, we're part of what the order is, we're getting more specific. And part of what the order is, we're getting into something that is greater and nobler, more beautiful, and more perfect. And we see that especially in the third item. Third, there is in man an inclination to good according to the nature of his reason. This is the most specific. It's what is unique to us as human beings, as rational animals. So other beings have reason, God and the angels, but they are not animals. Other animals exist, but they don't have reason. What makes human beings unique is that we are rational animals. And so the good of reason is not the only good we have. We also have the good of preservation, the good of procreation, but the good of reason is what is most unique to us as opposed to other beings and other animals. And it is the highest and greatest thing within us. It informs, going back, it would inform the preservation and the procreation. Because what do we want to preserve? We want to preserve ourselves as rational animals. We don't want to just survive by any possible means if it would mean doing something unreasonable or destructive of reason, against reason. And we don't want to, procreate and educate children in an unreasonable manner. That is, when we're educating them, yes, we have to take care of their physical needs, but we are hopefully just as concerned or even more concerned ultimately with the cultivation of their souls. So this is proper to human beings. Thus, man has a natural inclination to know the truth about God and to live in society. Here, Aquinas simply reflects that what it means to be reasonable, and we saw this in Joseph Pieper, there's two basic things. One is our relationship to reality itself. So because we're rational, we desire to know the nature of things. Ultimately, that means we desire the truth about God. But as we see in the Summa, the truth about God includes everything that we can know about everything in the universe that God created. And by nature, we want to know all of this. That's why we can only be happy with the knowledge of God. In heaven, as we talked about earlier, it's built into our very nature that we desire to know the truth about all things. But as Pieper pointed out, we desire to have this knowledge and to communicate it. Reason is logos, is speech. So it's both about reasoning, but it's also about communicating. And so we want to share that with others in society. To live in society is a fundamental need and a fundamental good for us. And it comes from the fact of being rational. So we don't merely live together like animals because of certain physical needs that we have, or even just emotional needs, but we live together because as rational beings, we need not only the whole truth of things, but we need to communicate that and help each other to understand and grasp that. And in this respect, whatever pertains to this inclination belongs to the natural law. For instance, to shun ignorance, to avoid offending those among whom one has to live, and other such things regarding the above inclination. Now, Aquinas never claims that he's given us an exhaustive list of the principles of natural law or practical reason, but within these areas that he talks about, the preservation of human life, the procreation of the human species, the education of the young, and seeking truth and seeking harmonious social relations, as far as I can tell, this is as close to a comprehensive sketch as we can get. That is, anything else we can think of that is a crucial good in human life will fit into one of these categories, or overlapping could include two or all three of them in various ways. Within each of these, of course, there are infinite particulars that we could choose. So when it comes to sexual intercourse and the education of offspring, this involves so many particular choices. Whom is going to marry whom, and how they're going to support and themselves and educate their children. Seeking truth, there are so many different truths and aspects of truth that we can pursue. Living in society, so many different relationships and associations and activities with others that we can participate in. Just like with the preservation of human life, there are so many things in food and medicine and exercise and so forth, things that are promoting or hurting that goal. So the goal here is not to give an exact list of things that we need to do or not do, but to show the criteria that we use in evaluating. Anytime that I want to take an action, Aquinas is not saying we have to stop and go through this list each time, but he's saying this is the essence of what we're doing if we're reasoning well. We are thinking about, how does this contribute to the preservation of human life? How does it contribute to the procreation and education of future generations? How does it contribute to the pursuit of truth? How does it contribute to social harmony? Those are the key criteria that we can and should be using to evaluate everything we do. So this is the outline, if you will, of what is meant by good. And as we get into Aquinas' ethical theory, we'll see that there's a lot more depth and detail we can go into the various virtues and vices, the various do's and don'ts. But this is basically the foundation for his whole theory of virtue and vice. A virtue is going to be a habit of thinking and acting that promotes these goods that we're talking about right now. A vice will be a habit of thinking and acting that undermines these goods. And then when we get into politics and society, the same is going to apply to laws and institutions. Laws and institutions that promote these goods will be good and beneficial. Laws and institutions that go against these goods are going to be harmful, even tyrannical, and to be opposed one way or another. So as we get into deeper into Aquinas, we will see that this breakdown of the good is going to be crucial to help us to understand what he's doing with the rest of his theory on ethics and politics.